According to the United Nations, human trafficking generates over $9 billion yearly in the United States alone, and the average jail time served for someone found guilty of buying sex with a child is about 1.5 years. Also, the average age of a sex trafficked child in the U.S. is between 13 to 14 years of old. And lastly, in 36% of the cases, families are somehow responsible. To talk about this very important issue, I'm pleased to have this incredible panel with me with Attorney General Reyes of Utah, Mr. Jerome Elam, President and CEO of Trafficking in America Task Force, and last but not least, Attorney General Bondi of Florida. Thank you so much for joining me on this very important topic.
Thanks, Tara.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the facts I mentioned are mind-boggling. Really. But before that, I want to talk about the terminologies used when addressing the victims of sex trafficking and child trafficking in the United States. Cindy McCain, as you all know, is a champion on this issue, and they recently changed a lot of terminologies in addressing this. I want to ask Attorney General Bondi, why is it that we have such a hard time even talking about this issue in the U.S.?
Well, we're trying to bring it out of the shadows, and that's what's been so important about bringing awareness to the issue, because it's living among us. And that's where we have to have our citizens helping us, because people don't want to believe that something so horrific can actually happen in our country. And so that's why it's so very important for people to be on the lookout. We have a website called youcanstopht.com. And the Uber driver, for instance, the flight attendant who saw signs of human trafficking and actually went in, they called the police and they broke up 2 major human trafficking rings. So none of us can do our jobs without your help in the public, without people looking for the signs of human trafficking.
And
that's
for that, we have
so
to talk
very
about
important.
It has to be out.
It has to be talked about. It has to be brought out into the light, and I think that's what my great co-panelists here have been doing such a great job of as well.
Mr. Elam, let's talk about the American Task on Trafficking in America, and let's talk about the report. It discusses that the effect of child pornography in boosting human trafficking is very high, actually. So let's talk about this. And then again, it goes back to why we're not addressing child pornography. Tell me about the correlation, and really, how can we move beyond this challenge?
You know, we really try to focus on what we call demand, which is why people go out and engage in buying sex trafficking. And it's been shown in 2 separate studies that child pornography is a driving force in people who go out and molest children. It's over 50% in both these studies of individuals that they actually polled while in prison. And one of the things that we have to really rectify right now is we can't let our kids learn about relationships from pornography on the internet. We've got to teach our young people how to respect women and how to interact in a relationship, because what happens is kids get sucked into pornography, and then they go and engage in sex trafficking because pornography drives them in that direction. So we try and educate our young people that is there a better way to go about engaging in relationships and to respect women, and that pornography is not the way to learn about life. You've got to learn about it while you're in church, from your parents, from your peers, and just really learn to respect and love women.
Well, thank you for that, but also I think on a larger level, on a national level, it's important to tackle both issues from both the government, the federal, but also state and then local levels. Would you agree? Absolutely,
and I really want to give a shout out to Hilton and Marriott, because both Hilton and Marriott hotels have banned pornography from all their hotels. Hilton is an amazing supporter of anti-human trafficking efforts, and so I think we need to have that push, along with education, to really set an example for our young people.
It's an excellent example. Attorney General Reyes, let's talk about the state of Utah. What have you seen as successful measures in your particular state in combating sex trafficking and child trafficking?
Well, first of all, Tara, thank you so much for covering this. Thank you to Facebook for taking the time, and thanks to all of the viewers who will hopefully lend their voices to ours to really talk about this issue and raise awareness. As you mentioned just a second ago, we have to attack these issues locally, domestically, both at the state and the federal level, but also globally. We can't successfully address this scourge that is growing at record proportions, is the fastest growing criminal enterprise worldwide, the second most lucrative. Many of us believe it has now surpassed even drugs and drug trading for the most lucrative criminal enterprise. So we have to work with our partners worldwide. That's why we're here today, to talk about labor trafficking specifically, but there's sex trafficking that you mentioned, organ harvesting, domestic servitude, conscription, all of these horrible manifestations. Those actually exist around the world, but also in places like Salt Lake City, Utah. Quiet, smaller population, otherwise very family-friendly environments. These things exist throughout all of our communities. In every single state, whether it's rural, whether it's urban, it doesn't matter the background of the person, anyone can become a victim, and I think that's one of the takeaways that we need to let everyone know. We're not here to try to scare people, but to give them a healthy understanding for the threat that it exists. It's inconceivable to me that 40 million, some estimates even more than that, modern day slaves exist on this earth today, and that we're not doing more. We're not jumping up and down on rooftops, out of our seats to do more. Now, these folks are doing a ton, but we need everybody's help to really go out and address this on so many different levels.
Talking about Utah, what would you say would be your number one priority in combating this issue?
Great question. So we have a multi-layered approach, right? Clearly, as a top law enforcement officer, there is an investigative and prosecutorial emphasis. How do we investigate? How do we get the resources to know how to do these cases, the technology to track down traffickers, working with other agencies? We have a statewide task force that I have assets from all federal, county, city, state assets to bring together. But even equally important is that, policy-wise, we have to pass better laws. We have in our state to not re-victimize victims, to give better tools to prosecutors and investigators. And then perhaps most importantly on the back end, we have to get the resources for the survivors, the victims. Once they've been liberated from these horrific environments, what are we going to do to help them recapture their lives, regain self-respect, to give them job opportunities, to help keep them from devolving back into that world. And so all of those things are things that we work on and do simultaneously to properly address the issue.
And I think that's why the public-private sector partnerships in this case really
we can't do it alone. We need that private sector.
And that's what I've been talking about so many corporations too, about that they need to go on youcanstopht.com, take it for themselves, look at the signs of what to look for to find a human trafficking victim, because I don't think we really gave kind of our viewers the basics. These are young boys and girls and men and women who are kidnapped, and they're kidnapped. They're immediately addicted to drugs to keep them kidnapped, and it's modern day slavery. And they're sold on the streets for either domestic servitude or to be raped 40, 50 times a day. Some of the young women are having babies as a result of rape. Their babies having babies, but they're living among us. These captors are taking these victims out in the public. And so all of our great corporate partners out there, we're teaching them to tell their employees what to look for. You know, I keep going back to the Uber driver. He had a fare and it just didn't look right. It was a man who was exhibiting control over a young girl in the back of his cab. And he called it in, and by calling it in, he broke up an entire human trafficking ring. The flight attendant, she saw a plane, and she was on a plane, and she saw a man with a young girl. It didn't look right. The girl got up to use the restroom. She put a sticky in the bathroom and said, "Do you need help?" with a marker, and the girl wrote yes. When that plane landed, authorities were there, and it broke up a ring. That's how the community can help us throughout this country.
That's so important.
And just to emphasize her point, the largest child sex trafficking ring in the U.S. is run out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. 3 generations by the Evans family. The 24 states, including Canada. The only way that was brought down is one very smart officer pulled over a 2 young women on a traffic stop, noticed they had fake IDs, and from there this entire ring that had been run for 30 years came tumbling down. So one individual can be a game changer in fighting human trafficking. Everybody can make a difference.
And I think this is very important for our viewers watching, a lot of millennials, a lot of young people. This is how they can be involved, and this is how they can really
just
help.
one repost, just raising awareness a little bit, just talking about it, posting an article, a link, and this doesn't happen by accident either, Tara. We have Truckers Against Trafficking who actually train, airline ambassadors. These corporate and industry groups and individual companies can really make a difference. Polaris Project, Operation Underground Railroad, so many groups out there joining the fight.
I want to ask one last question because it's important in pushing policy and also funds for this issue nationwide, measuring impact. How do you do this, and how has it been done? Because it's certainly difficult to measure the success stories and then the way this issue is being tackled.
We measure success one victim at a time. Every victim we save is a victory for us because the numbers are so insurmountable, and we know that the current ones aren't representative of what's actually out there. So and I think all three of us take that approach that we save one victim at a time, we address that one victim, and I have to say that I'm so honored because these two individuals sitting beside me have changed the way we approach human trafficking, because what we've done is we've gone from treating victims as criminals to treating them as victims, and they have changed the face of that. And I just want to say that Attorney General Reyes, there was a case where a trafficker was caught and put in prison, committed suicide, but Attorney General Reyes made sure the victims got to go before the judge and tell their story. And having a victim be validated like that, it's such an empowering situation because you can't put traffickers away without victim testimony. And victims are terrified because if they think a trafficker is going to be out on the streets in 6 months, they're not going to testify. So both these individuals have created an environment where victims feel safe to come forward, they feel protected, they feel like they matter, which is the most important thing in the world to them. So I'm just incredibly thankful for both these individuals.
And Jerome is a former victim, a child victim himself,
yes.
And he's got a compelling story. Please check out Trafficking in America Task Force, because Jerome is a world expert in that.
It more than any of us ever will, because
Oh, wow.
you lived it, and now instead of a victim, you are a survivor.
Exactly.
You are an advocate.
He's channeled his pain to
what
help
he's
lift
done.
And I
others.
think that changing the language is the most
Yeah,
important,
thank
and
you.
thank you
Survivor.
for that work, because if folks in the public sector and those who have experienced it firsthand don't push the narrative, then people at home may have a hard time having
Can we ask the
support.
viewers, though, to please speak up? If they notice anything, even if they're not sure if it's trafficking, but it's something, if their spidey sense tingles and they feel like something's wrong, report it. Report it to local law enforcement, to your state attorney general, to somebody, because we would rather look at and investigate those cases, and perhaps it's not, than to miss a case that really is trafficking because no one wanted to step forward. They didn't want to make anybody uncomfortable. Please, please.
I have to ask this question. I know we're running a little bit short on time, but speaking of the public, let's talk about Google and technology and how really we are having a problem with this issue online.
Yeah, Pam led the way on that.
I'm
That'd
going
be
to
good for
have you talk about that.
Well, I authored a letter to Congress, and 49 attorneys general signed on bipartisan about the Decency
That's
Act.
quite a feat.
And it's basically Backpage. What?
That's quite a feat to get 49 attorneys general.
It's Backpage.com, and I mean they're horrible. They are out there recruiting children on the internet, and we're helping.
And
Congress.
that's searchable on Google. So Google is now being sort of dragged into the conversation in order to address this. Is that right? And this is the letter that you're proposing?
Yes, we've sent it to Congress, and you know what we really need to do, that we need to shut down Backpage. I'm sorry, Backpage is horrible. Do you agree, General Reyes?
Have to.
Oh, they're recruiting kids on Backpage, and they have the ability to stop it.
Well, at least
and
that
they're
element
not
of their
doing it.
business. I mean,
well, they have
yeah,
the ability to stop it, and they're not doing it. So
Well,
they're not helping us, and they're not a good partner.
Let's put it this way, they caught a Brooklyn music teacher trying to buy sex with an 8-year-old boy on Backpage about 3 months ago. And that's common. That is common. These children are being exploited, they're being tortured, they're being sold. By the time we finish this interview, 10 to 20 will have been sold on Backpage.
Can you believe
We've
that?
got to stop it.
And that's just the regular internet. If you talk about the dark net, the dark web, we track them way down into the depths of that depravity.
And again, coming back to the point about private and public sector cooperation, especially when it comes to technology and the internet. Thank you so much,
Thank
Attorney
you, Tara.
General
Thank you.
Reyes, Attorney General Bondi, and Mr. Elam.
Thank you. Thank
Grateful
you.
to have you.
Grateful to have you.
Thank you.
Great.
Hey,
You were awesome.
No, you're awesome.